see. We're showing the whole world what a country should be. United we stand in America, hand in hand in America. Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, July 17, and I'm Dr. Mary Byrne with Changing Times. My co-host, Lynn Morris, we were excited. He was planning to come back today, but he had a little setback, and so he's promised me that he'll be here next week, and he'll bring his own guest. So I have a special guest, a dear friend of mine that I've known for over a decade, Senator Jill Carter. But we're not going to talk about lawmaking. We're going to talk about the call to become a public servant, what that was like for her, what it was like to get the call to serve her family as a homeschool mom. The point is we're going to focus on what it means to be a praying person, a listening person, and to act according to the call. But first, I would like to ask everyone to pray with me for all public servants, and especially Donald Trump, whether or not you're going to vote for him. The point is, he's putting himself out there. He's risking his life, literally, as a public servant. And we need to remember the father, he was called a girl dad, who actually sacrificed his life for his family. He was also a public servant as a fire chief. It shouldn't be dangerous to be a public servant, but we've come to that point in our country where it's time for praying people to wake up and understand they need to use the authority they have as believers and as prayers to protect our country, the people who serve it, our families, and ourselves. So please bow your head with me. We're going to say a moment of prayer. Father, we are grateful for the revelation of yourself to us, that we can come to you and to have the freedom to praise you and to ask you for your protection in every area of our lives. We are grateful for the people you raise up to be servants to the community and to the country. We ask you, Lord, for them to have protection against any evil forces that would disturb your plans for their service. I ask you, Lord, to protect them, their families, and in particular, for the healing of Donald J. Trump. I ask you that you heal his ear, his spirit, and any physical and emotional trauma that might have he might have experienced from the assassination attempt, but that the news is not reporting. We bless you, God, because you are all-powerful and all-good. We ask you to turn our hearts and our heads to you, that we can be servants in whatever capacity you call us, so that we can become a praying country again. For you and your Son, we ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Well, amen. Thanks for your time. The next step I want to address is our sponsors who are doing a service for us. That would be Brad Pistow at Trinity Insurance and Financial Services. You've heard us mention Brad Pistow every week because he has been so generous in supporting this ministry. If you would like some financial advice for your retirement, please call Brad at 417-581-9222. And another proud sponsor we have, as a good friend of Lynn's, is Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia. If you are looking for the purchase of a new automobile or a used automobile that would be new to you, please look into Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia and support them because they support us. Their number is 417-882-3838. Thanks so much. And Dennis, you'll have that band on the bottom?
I'll have it later.
He'll have it soon. All right. Now to my good friend and our special guest, Jill Carter. Jill is a state senator for the state of Missouri, and I've known. And, I just know her as Jill, so I'm going to get pretty comfortable on this show, and we're just going to have a conversation. My point in asking Senator Jill Carter to join us is in this spirit of public service. We feature people who are difference makers on this show, and the whole point is ordinary people can do extraordinary things with the power of God behind them, but they have to be listening for His call and depending on Him. Lord knows, the past couple of years in the state Senate have been very trying. But the strength you draw from God replenishes you. If you don't have that, I really have no concept of how to do the things you do. So you got a fan here. I've been admiring you for a long time. But what I want to tell the listeners is that I first met you and your family in 2013 when you invited me to come to Granby to speak to your community about how the Department of Education was sneaking, basically, Common Core into the state behind the backs of the legislatures. Somehow alarms went off in your house. You knew you had to do something, and you were just an ordinary citizen who used the resources you had to get in touch with me, to bring me in as a speaker. And what was fascinating to me is the sacrifice even then you and your family made of your personal resources. You gave up your vacation money to rent a gym so that your whole community could come and hear the information. And I thought that's the spirit of self-sacrifice that is the nobility we look for in people. And you and Claude showed it in spades. Could you tell us about what was going on at the time and what the discussion was like to say, what can we do? And you landed on that idea.
So looking back, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be here with you, Mary. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You've been a lifelong friend. I just consider you, lifelong. My life of
Oh, we're doing the
really,
buffering thing.
you have her, and so I really appreciate our friendship. What happened that kind of set me on this trajectory was I had a couple of people come to me and just start talking about Common Core. It was something that was happening a little bit in the news. The conservative talk shows were starting to talk about it just a little bit. And so I had gone to a community-wide meeting. I had a gentleman walk up and say, "Hey, have you heard about Common Core?" I was like, "Yeah, a little bit, but haven't really paid attention," like many things, And so he said, "Well, you might want to look into it." Well, over the course of a little bit of time, there were two other experiences that I had where people came up to me and asked me the same question.
Oh,
And
there
so
it is. Confirmation when you have different people.
Yes.
Yes.
So I have learned that the pattern in my life is that if something kind of pricks my spirit, people say a lot of things to you, but when it kind of is like, yeah, I probably, and then you get busy and going on. But when it happens, 3 times, I'm usually like, okay, I've got to look into that, or I've got to pull that thread. And that was the situation with this. And so I just told my husband, I said, "Hey, our kids were young at the time. And I just, Mom and our laptop, dangerous thing." And so I stayed up all night just researching what was going on. And I remember my room, next morning and him saying, well, what did you find out? And I said, yeah, it's bad. You know, her who I and Eden, she must have been 8 or 9, 7, 8, 9 at the time. If that old. I'm trying to remember the time frame, but I just remember her being a little girl sitting in the corner of the living room in a rocking chair, listening to this conversation between my husband and I. We stayed up all night. I was tired. I didn't know what to do with the information that I had, which was very frustrating. And so I just said, you know, we just need George Washington to come and fix everything. And my daughter said out loud, and as I wish it were that so convicted moment to think, what's my daughter going to do when she's confronted with conflict or something that isn't right? And so that's really what kind of motivated me. No, I am definitely, I can do something. And that was kind of the motivation behind me trying to just look for answers.
Looking into your child's eyes. I mean, that's really, to me, the most sacred motivation is the next generation.
No, and like I said, have her just say, Mom, you can do it. Okay, well, you know, am I going to want her to feel like a victim?
Right.
In a country that I feel like should be victimless. And so that was my compulsion. And the big question that kept running through my mind, what am I modeling for my children when I look around and I feel like they're surrounded on all sides, right?
Right.
And over the course of a decade, 12, 13 years that it's been since then, there's definitely a reason to feel more surrounded on all sides with our government and our, you know, things that are going on in our country. And so it's like we have collected out of our comfort to other. What do we want? And so anyway, that, I hope that answers.
Oh, absolutely. That's how it got started on a very personal level. And you know, the confirmation that you get from a series of people, not just one, not just, it wasn't something that you imagined by yourself. Again, it's that self-sacrifice for the next generation. And even though Washington didn't have children that, he was their birth father, he did raise Martha's children. And,
Right.
And I remember there were talks he gave where he encouraged his army, saying, think of the future generations, because what you do here is going to affect them. So there you are, just a mom responding to the call. And so what was the response from the community about your efforts when really it was just a personal sacrifice? You had no vision of running for office. This wasn't something you did out of ambition. What was the response from the community?
Well, you know, we were able to. I took to trace the alarm in the Capitol and try to evoke some change that would bring more local control back to our communities and our schools. And so initially, and I always come from the attitude of not trying to work adversarial with people. I consider people usually in two camps. One, we act out of ignorance or we act out of stupidity, you know, and myself at times, right? So I'm either acting because I don't know something, or I'm acting to alleviate that first barrier of not. So I'm going to we do our due diligence to try to educate people, and that was the goal with the community-wide meeting. We had a couple of hundred people show up, 200 or 300 people show up. I send out mailers. I mean, it was by just opened up the doors. I had a local businessman who donated. I stayed up, I think, 11 or 12 o'clock at night. Except when you're done, but use my coffee a lot faster. You know, it was just little things like that that just helped us be able to do what we did. And eventually the school board was the first in the state to pass a resolution to help the legislature understand what was going on with Common Core and what was going on with education in general. And that was spurred a lot more conversations across the state with other school districts having resolutions. And if not the same resolutions, they were definitely weighing in on whether or not, you know, we should change CORBs. And so that led to the passage of legislation with Senator Ed Emery.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that started. That was so it was, to me, I tell people, everybody should shepherd a piece of legislation.
Uh-huh.
Because once you do, you realize a little bit of the culture up there and how difficult it is to really roll back government.
Right. Right.
And make it function and work for the people.
Because there's so many elements up there that aren't for the people. They have another agenda, and they're paid to be there. And if we don't show up, then they fill the void. They fill the vacuum, and that's the voice that's heard, not ours. So there's a lot to be done. And you mentioned the school board. That was the purpose of public schools, was to teach people how to govern themselves and engage with government. That purpose has been derailed in a big way, but that's, in my opinion, why we got to the place we are, is that we have several generations now of people who have been duped into thinking education was for workforce development rather than to preserve the rights and liberties of the people. And it's actually written in the Missouri Constitution. The reason the General Assembly was authorized in the Constitution to provide public schools was to preserve the rights and liberties of the people. So that's what we have to get back to. A, is knowing what our documents say, and B, ensuring that as the people, we're proactive in keeping the legislators accountable, because like I said, there's lots of voices up there, and they're not ours. And so we have to be there to be the counter force. I remember the first time you gave testimony at a committee hearing in Jeff City, and you were preparing to advocate for your children. What made you realize that you had to go to the state level? You talked about your school board level. What said, no, this isn't enough? I have to, whatever my own internal barriers are, I have to overcome them so that I can advocate in the right place. Because I was there at your first testimony. I was so proud of you. But you have to overcome those internal barriers. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was scared to death.
Yeah.
You know, it's very intimidating to go up there for the first time as just an average citizen. And so, I was real. I was at the school. My first conversation with somebody about Common Core was a teacher at the school. Mm-hmm. So I have a special needs son. He's on the autism spectrum. And I was very heavily involved at the school. And so I had a teacher walk up to me, changing the stammer, rolling out what's called this Common Core. And so I said, well, if you're concerned, why don't you go to the school board? I thought I was doing my due diligence by voting. And so to me, if you have a concern about education, then go to your school board. And so what she said to me was, we're scared of losing our job. Mm. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go to the school board for you. I mean, I'll be your voice. I don't have a problem with that. And so when I went to the school board, the pushback began that they were scared of losing their accreditation and their funding, because if they went against the Department of Ed, district. Well, schools are the pillars of what bring us together as a community. They're our identity, right? Beside the churches are our schools. Accreditation, and so that is what it's like. Okay, well, we can't fix it at a school board level, so then we've got to take it to the state level and let the state, if the state Department of Ed is the one doing this, or the federal Department of Ed is the one that's doing this, and pushing and shoving this down onto my local school, then we've got to go higher.
Right. And so that rhetoric about Missouri's a local control state is just that. It's rhetoric. Ever since 1993, when we had that Outstanding Schools Act, and, they made standards and accountability sound like it was going to be a positive thing. But what it really meant was eventual federal control. And, they're good at marketing. That's all I can say. They're good at marketing.
Yeah.
And
they still talk about local control.
Yeah.
So well, the local control is like, wow, I love to see and see. I've asked my superintendent, can you do logic? Can you do Latin? Can you do debate? Could you do a classical model of education if you wanted? And he's like, we would love to do something like that. But we would lose all.
Yep.
To exist.
That's right. Those the accreditation standards that districts are evaluated on, and I remind people that your accreditation score either repels or invites businesses into the communities, which affects your property values. It's a big cascade of effects on what your school does. So truly, there is a carrot and stick approach to controlling your local school district at the state level, but they are also accepting federal funds with conditions attached, so that the department at the state level is not responsive to local control. It's responsive to its funding sources, and it's not just the federal government; it's private corporate grants as well. That's why you have to look under the hood. You can't take everything for granted on what you're told is the structure of government. There's always the formal explanation, and then there's the informal activity of what really happens. And you have to be there to scope out what that informal activity is, which is why we're grateful you're doing what you're doing as a state senator up there. As a parent, you made another kind of sacrifice for your children's education by homeschooling them. So it's not like you're against public school. Your children were enrolled in that, but there was a time and a place when you decided, no, the best situation is for me to teach them at home. What was that call like? What made you?
So essentially, I mean, it had a lot to do with, I mean, I put my kids in, my oldest son in public education. He went to school at the local school until I think it was his second grade. Seth, will you close those doors? Sorry. And so we switched to a private school, but I had, my second son was on the autism spectrum. And so at the time, I mean, he's 27 years old now. And at the time, I mean, he was 4 or 5 years old, and there were just no services for autism. And so I had researched, I mean, I remember this seems so bizarre now, but we had initially got the internet to try to figure out how to help our son. And so the internet was brand new, and, we got it specifically about him. And so that's why we started a homeschool, because, and I did partner with the school. They were able to, we had a great relationship with the school. They helped me bring a lady from New York, and school helped that resource, paid for that resource. And how we paid for it was we did a regional teacher continuing ed training course for the whole region to do a meeting on behavioral therapy, ABA therapy.
Right.
And then that paid for her trip, and that paid for me being able to have that, her come and kind of oversee the program for my son. So homeschooling at home, he went from being nonverbal to being in a regular kindergarten class without an aid from in 2 years' time.
Right.
And
So
so
what,
it
once
just-
again, it's looking into the eyes of your child that motivates you to get outside the box. And
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, and every one of your kids, you know, I have 5 children. I've my third child, my daughter, is she did private online school through a classical online school, but she also went to the highest time, and so she participated in some of those activities or in those classes that I thought would be beneficial for her. She felt like would be beneficial, but then she still had some of those classes online that I felt like would be beneficial. So
And don't you feel that as a mom, you're in the best position to know what that child's needs are, however God created them, that you're the one on the ground looking at those needs and saying, okay, God, lead me in the right direction for nurturing this child that you have plans for. You know,
Right.
that's what parents do.
no, it's, you know, I kind of encourage, especially high school age, it's good they have those extracurricular activities, those classes that they can kind of branch out into and kind of investigate some of the areas that they might be interested in. I encouraged her, hey, what about going up to the high school? She would have nothing to do with it. And so so she never went.
Uh-huh.
So it's just a lot of prayer, trying to help them find their calling.
Yes.
While at the same time trying to be true to what you feel like they need as a parent. It's always that.
Right, right. So for all of this decade that I've known you being in service to your family and your children, what made you decide I have to run for office? I'm not getting anywhere just talking to the legislators. I'm going to have to be one. What was that like?
So we, once you started going up to the Capitol, and I don't say this to discourage those people out there because we want people more involved. But for me, once I was involved up there, and you met other people from across the state who were just like you, that were trying to move, you know, big policy to try to really reform government, you got kind of pulled into those issues as well. You could see that there were other needs that you could be involved in. And so we collaborated. And so over the course of a decade, I just continued. The time I was either on news, and so we worked together. And
so your comfort level went way up from that first
Yeah.
testimony.
For sure. Because I was like, you realize that it's human too. We're just people with our pants on one leg at a time, and we are people, especially if they're a good legislator, they're going to be the first ones to admit that they need, and I especially put in a difficult for me because I was the researcher.
Right.
I would sit there and read those bills ad nauseum, pull out, look up what was going on in other states, and I now don't have nearly the luxury of time to do
Right.
that as I like. Wait a minute, it put me on the other side of the line to say, as a legislator now, I want people calling me to say, this bill says this, this, and this. they're my process where we've had this culture of you stay in your lane, I'll stay in mine. That's the culture I experienced going up there as just a grassroots person. Just
Well,
as a mom.
that's what the lobbyists wanted you to do.
Right. But now as a legislature seeing wow, and buy-in from people. There's no way I can know everything about criminal law without talking to my police officers, my sheriffs, the boots on the grounds that are on the front line. There's just no way any legislator can know everything that they need to know. And it was not intended for the legislature to be. Started me down the path of running was being up there for another issue, which it was COVID. There was and here I have the bill right in front of me. It was a Senate Bill 51 where they were going to give immunity to hospitals and vaccinations at manufacturers. Vaccination and that belonged to me. Why are you giving liability protection to government is picking winners and losers and who can stay open and who can't? And they were saying they were critical employees and critical infrastructure. Well, our churches are critical infrastructure also. And the health of the soul is just as important as the health. As we went up there, and we could see that through research, obviously just pouring through the bill, that a person who owned a coffee shop could be charged with 2 felonies for not abiding by the Department of Health's regulations that the legislature was willing to give carte blanche authority to. Unrestricted, unbridled, jurisdiction to mandate what and your home on. And so we went up there, several of us, and we were listening to the debate. We were trying to change and get them to vote no against this bill. And we could see that wasn't going to happen with as much pressure as we were putting on them across the state. That wasn't going to happen. And so the Hail Mary in our minds was, well, if government is willing to give manufacturers of vaccinations, nursing homes, and hospitals immunity, then let's give the churches immunity. So at least our churches could feel comfortable enough to stay open without losing, their shirts.
Right.
And so
you were working on behalf of God's people.
So we offered. We were just trying to think. Okay, this is crazy. Again, all this. Community protection. There were 5 states that had the most deaths across the country, and they were the same ones that had this legislation. Because nursing homes, there was no liability for lack of medical care. Right, that was written in the bill. It was just basically whatever, because we were kind of in a new world. They just gave everybody carte blanche with immunity, and again, so we thought, okay, well, if we can't vote, not mandated to go to church. So if you were somebody who was not comfortable going, you could stay home. But for those people who are wanting and seeking that sense of community at that difficult time.
At their church. Yeah.
Yes, at their church. Then we felt like it was okay for the pastor to decide and for the church to decide whether or not to remain open without fear of retribution from the state. Being charged with felonies, right?
Right.
And so Senator Mike Moon offered that amendment on the Senate floor. My senator at the time was a co-sponsor of this piece of legislation. And I had gone to him and said, hey, just, again, I'm trying to eliminate in my own mind those 2 criteria that I have. Are you willfully going against what no, this and this and this in it. And then he meant to me was, and he was so loud that the page came over, started to walk over the door. And so I just said, asking you to bring some awareness to it that you may not have known. And he said, well, that's not what it says. And you're not a lawyer. You never will be. And so he basically was done with me. And I said, well, that's not the case. And you're right. I'm not a lawyer. But on page 11, it does say you can be charged with reckless endangerment with willful misconduct. You are giving carte blanche authority to the Department of Health. You are going to shut down your local mom and pops. You are potentially going to decimate what we have always considered a free market enterprise and the ability to make choices in our country. We didn't know where this was all going to go.
And that was what I'm admiring, the fact that you had self-confidence in your ability to read. And that's what public schools were supposed to do. That it's
Right.
the right, you are equipped to protect your rights and liberties. And you were not intimidated by somebody who tried to intimidate you.
Well, at that
Because
point, you had read so much, and these lawyers, we have given so much deference to experts.
yes.
We have delegated our role and responsibility as citizens, as the people, to lawyers, doctors, all of our own rights, right? We relegated all of this and delegated it. So when I read, reckless endangerment and willful misconduct, no, that's what it says.
Yes.
I don't care if you're a lawyer, I can read.
Yes.
And so when it says this, don't tell me a kind of confidence that we need to be able to have, be able to take back what is right. And it's something that we learn. My daughter now having a child, she'll call and say, well, the doctor said this, or the doctor said that, or so-and-so said this and said that. And I said, you have to wait and press into those issues and receive confirmation for yourself. Do not relegate that responsibility.
That's right. God gave it to you, and you take in opinions, but you're the decision maker. That's how family works. That's right.
Yes. And so the health and welfare of your child is a high price to pay to make an expert feel good about himself.
Yes. Thank you, Jill. Yes.
So same with our right. This is a country, going back to the legislation, Mike Moon was offering an amendment that would give the churches that same immunity. And my senator at the time stood up and called pastors potential bad actors, and said that he had an amendment that would shut down all of the churches during a time of a pandemic. And so he was pushing into the other way, right?
Right.
And I thought, you are know what you're talking about. The Bible says you reason, right? You counsel with your counselors. You reason together. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, this says whatever, and I have a different understanding of that, we reason together until we come to a place of agreement. You don't sit there and tell somebody, thank you for waiting. Now, again, I don't always agree with people, but I can say, this is why I believe what I believe. This is my understanding of it. And I tried to get confirmation from those key people and those on the front lines who say, this is what it has historically meant. This is how we see it. So I can see how it might be seen that way, but this is how it is in the VOTEC world, right? This is how it functions or works in the church. And so then I can say, okay, well, based on the concerns over here, how can we make sure that it doesn't become what the fear is over here? And then you reason together and build, like I said, you build unity. So anyway, at the time, my senator was not willing to do that. And I thought, if I had to go GoPro on my head, I thought my community would be shocked at what I was seeing. Nothing happened for another 9 months or so. And we kind of got through COVID. We're kind of coming out on the tail end of it. It was February, the end of January, died. Because we were still, like I said, we're still kind of coming out of COVID. The country was a little dicey at time. Nobody knew. Again, we were on new territory. Do something like this again. We have to have people in place that understand the terrain and where we are, and they're not just willing to sit down and tell people to shut up.
Right.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I don't want to ever hear that again. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
That should never be said to a concerned citizen. And so, sorry.
And so you ran, and it's a wonderful thing. Yeah. That's what I wanted the audience to hear, is that you had no special preparation. What you had was a good education. You understood the freedom that God had provided for his people to come to him, especially in times of crisis. And you're going to defend that right. And there was so many people get involved in politics for the power. They have ambition for power rather than the call to serve. And clearly, it's because you were present that you understood what the incumbent was, the position of the incumbent, and you knew that wasn't going to be supportive of the churches. So that's what activated you. But it's your education and your presence, being engaged with the process, that gave you confidence that, hey, you could do this too. And I
just want to say that sometimes it's going to turn out the way that.
Could you repeat that? We had a little buffering problem here.
As believers, we often think before we act and press into some unknown world or path, right? We think to ourselves, I'm not so sure I want to go down that path because I don't know I don't know that it's going to turn out the way that I want it.
The way that I want, right?
So, we embarrassed. We don't want to be shamed. We don't want to misstep. We don't want to. So all of these fears, right? God hasn't given us the spirit of fear. I might go south and absolutely free. I had no money. I'd never been in a campaign before. If you would have told me, I would have ran. For having a million. That to say, hold loosely. I might just be a one-term senator. I have no idea. But that's not my identity.
Right.
Right? I don't get my identity out of being a senator. I get my identity out of walking the path that God has placed me on at the time. And I cannot tell you how many doors opened. God's hand was in everything I did. And I did not see sometimes the path light up until I was at the door.
Ah, very good. It reminds me of the story of Abraham. God said, I'm going to show you a place and start walking. And I'll let you know when you get there.
So I spent a ton of time and I'll do. Here we're in this really big awkward place in our country where trying to step down and right doesn't like the left. But at the same time, we do need to engage in a way that is honorable and has integrity. And it's about principles, not people in politics.
Correct.
Like our alignments become about the people that we have a connection to. And I tell people all the time, don't do that. You need to align. So long as I'm aligning with the principles and the values that we espouse to, we value, then I'm good. But the minute that I don't, you need to get somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I so much appreciate your honesty, your integrity, the exposure of your own fears, but your willingness to walk with God through this in service to Him and in service to others. And I don't know of a better example than you, Jill Carter, for, well, Mike Moon too. But we're not here to celebrate just particular legislators. It's just it was your story of personal self-sacrifice and how that led you over 10 years onto the road to the path to where you are now. And I just want to bless you for that and celebrate you for that and assure you that in our eyes, you are a difference maker.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And you were one of those key people in my life that really helped me. You were one of the answers to prayer. And so I really do whatever path it is that He's taking us down. And so fear is just, don't be afraid. And just press into why you're here. I think the only thing that is so disheartening at the end of our lives is that we may have missed our call.
Yeah, right.
I would much rather say too much than say too little. Or do too much than do too little,
As long as it's done not out of, again, it's not personal ambition. It's done out of a willingness to serve. And yes, we'll make mistakes. But God is forgiving. There's nothing that is irredeemable. Yep. And we just have to remember that He loves us. So Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. We look forward to having our audience back next week with Lynn. So have a blessed week until then, and we'll see you then.
America.